Even as I sit here writing these words, my hands tremble. Some memories don't fade with time. Instead, they replay in your head over and over, like a broken record you can't turn off. What I'm about to share is one of those memories, something I lived through, something that still makes my skin crawl whenever I think about it. I had just finished university and landed my first job in the city. Money was tight. My family couldn't offer much support, and I had no choice but to settle for the first cheap apartment I could find. It was an old four-story building, the kind with a corner grocery shop tucked under the stairwell and narrow hallways that always smelled faintly of damp concrete. My unit was on the third floor. Directly above me, on the fourth, lived a man I never saw. When the landlord showed me the place, he gestured upstairs and said, "There's a gentleman up there. Keeps to himself. Doesn't bother anyone." I didn't think much of it at the time. In a big city, neighbors often remain strangers. Still, as the weeks went by, I began to notice things that made me uneasy. At first, it was small, occasional scraping noises from above, which I brushed off as old pipes or shifting furniture. But then the sounds became strange. Around 3 or 4 in the morning, I would hear chairs dragging across the floor, heavy objects thudding as if dropped deliberately. One night, I woke abruptly to a sharp crack from the ceiling, like something wooden snapping in two. I lay frozen, staring into the darkness, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I tried to laugh it off with friends at work. "Maybe your neighbor's a sleepwalker," one suggested. "Or he works night shifts," another added. Both explanations sounded reasonable, but deep down, neither fit. The noises weren't random. They had rhythm, intention, as if someone was moving things around methodically, like performing a task. Curiosity got the better of me. One evening, I lingered in the stairwell, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious man, but no one ever came or went. His door had no welcome mat, no signs of life. Even the mailbox was empty, never a single letter or bill. It was as though the apartment were unoccupied, and yet, night after night, the noises continued. One time, I pressed my ear to the ceiling and swore I could hear a faint humming, like a machine running. It wasn't loud enough for anyone else to notice, but once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. Finally, I decided to ask the shopkeeper downstairs if he knew anything. He gave me a wary look and said, "His name's Mr. Hassan. Lived there for years. Quiet type. Doesn't shop here, though. Never seen him buy food or anything." That chilled me. Everyone buys food. Everyone needs something. But according to the shopkeeper, this man lived like a ghost, unseen, unaccounted for. The following nights were worse. The dragging grew harsher, louder, and then came a new sound. Metal scraping against metal, high-pitched and unbearable, like someone grinding steel, always around 3 a.m. One night, unable to stand it, I stepped quietly into the stairwell. The building was silent, except for that noise above me, echoing faintly through the concrete. I crept upstairs and stopped outside his door. The metallic grinding was clear now, rising and falling in a steady rhythm. My hand hovered over the doorbell, but my body froze. A wave of dread washed over me so strong I could hardly breathe. Without thinking, I spun on my heel and fled back to my apartment, slamming the lock shut behind me. From that night on, I began keeping a journal. Every sound, every hour, every detail. I wrote it all down, and the more I recorded, the more I realized something terrifying. The noises weren't random at all. They happened on a pattern, almost exact, as if on a schedule. The question burned in my mind, night after night, louder than the scraping from above. What was my neighbor really doing up there? The more I wrote in that journal, the more obsessed I became. My life turned into a strange cycle. Work during the day, listening and documenting at night. My friends noticed my exhaustion. "You look terrible," one of them said. "Maybe you should move out if it bothers you so much. Move out." It sounded simple, yet something in me refused. Maybe pride, maybe stubborn curiosity. I couldn't leave until I understood what was happening upstairs. By the third week, I had noticed a pattern: the dragging, the scraping, the metallic grinding. They always started between 3:15 and 3:30 a.m., never earlier, never later. That precision was unsettling. Who performs heavy work in the middle of the night, at the exact same hour, every single day? One night, I mustered the courage to press my ear against the ceiling for as long as I could bear. That's when I realized something new: faint footsteps, pacing back and forth, slow, deliberate, heavy steps, not the restless wandering of someone sleepless, but the measured strides of a person performing a task. I felt my stomach twist. The following day, I decided to linger in the stairwell again. Hours passed, but no one came down from the fourth floor. The other tenants passed by occasionally, but none of them ever looked up. None of them spoke about the upstairs neighbor. It was as though the man above me didn't exist. Finally, I asked one of the older neighbors directly. She frowned, hesitant, then muttered, "Oh, him. He's been here forever. Never seen him outside. Some say he works from home. Others think he's not right in the head. Best not to ask." Her words haunted me. That night, I barely slept. The noises began again: dragging, scraping, grinding. But this time, I noticed something different. In between the metallic shrieks, I heard muffled thuds, irregular and heavy, like something being dropped, or like something struggling. I froze in bed, every nerve in my body screaming. I wanted to convince myself it was furniture, maybe an old wardrobe tipping over, but the sound was too organic, too uneven. For the first time, I thought, what if there's someone else up there? The next morning, I knocked on his door. I don't know what I expected. Maybe silence. Maybe an angry man telling me to mind my business. But there was nothing, not even a shuffling sound. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. On impulse, I bent down and peered through the keyhole. At first, I saw only darkness. Then, faintly, a dim yellow glow, like a single bulb burning somewhere deep inside. I leaned closer. The air drifting through the crack smelled faintly metallic, cold and sharp, like rust or iron. My heart hammered. I pulled back quickly, terrified he might suddenly open the door and catch me, but it remained closed, silent, indifferent. That night, the sounds grew violent. The grinding screeched longer. The dragging thundered louder. At one point, I swore I heard what sounded like a muffled voice, a low groan cut short. My pen slipped from my fingers. As I tried to write it down, I stayed awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, imagining horrors I couldn't quite name. By the end of the week, my fear had turned into compulsion. I started recording audio on my phone at night, setting it by the ceiling to capture every sound. The first recording chilled me to the bone. The noises were clearer than I realized. The grinding, the thuds, and underneath it all, a faint dragging, wet and irregular. I replayed that recording again and again until the sun rose. Each time, the same thought pounded in my head. He's not moving furniture. I couldn't stop listening to that recording. Each time, the details sharpened. The screech of metal, the dull thuds, and beneath it all, the wet, dragging noise. It was subtle, but once I noticed it, I couldn't ignore it. It sounded disturbingly organic, like something heavy being pulled across the floor, something that didn't want to move. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I had a wild imagination, but deep inside, I knew better. The next evening, I showed the recording to one of my coworkers. He listened with his eyebrows raised, then laughed. Bro, that's just an old radiator or plumbing. These buildings make crazy noises. He handed my phone back with a smirk. You've been watching too many horror movies. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was losing my mind. But when the noises returned at 3:17 a.m., like clockwork, I realized I couldn't keep ignoring it. I decided to dig deeper. During the day, when the building was quiet, I crept upstairs and stood at his door again. I pressed my ear against it. Silence. Absolute silence. I even tried the doorknob. Locked, of course. But I noticed something strange. The wood around the knob was badly scratched, as though someone had fumbled with keys in the dark or struggled to open it with shaking hands. A shiver ran down my spine. The hallway light flickered, and I nearly bolted back downstairs. But something compelled me to linger. I crouched and looked at the gap under the door. It was so narrow, I could barely see anything. But there it was again, that faint yellow glow, like a single lamp burning endlessly inside. Who keeps a light on all day and night? Later, I spoke with the building's janitor, pretending to be casual. Hey, do you ever see the guy in 4B? I asked. The old man squinted at me, then shook his head. No, he pays rent by envelope, always slipped under the landlord's door, never face to face. Strange fellow. Have you been inside his apartment? For repairs or anything? The janitor's expression darkened. Not in years, and I don't plan to. Some doors are better left closed, son. That answer haunted me for the rest of the day. That night, I recorded again. This time, I sat by the phone, headphones plugged in, listening live as the sounds unfolded. My body stiffened when between the scraping and grinding, I caught it. A voice. It was faint, muffled, almost swallowed by the ceiling. A low, breathless whisper, like someone pleading. My heart nearly stopped. I yanked the headphones off, my skin prickling with terror. I paced the room, debating what to do. Call the police? What would I tell them? My neighbor makes weird noises at night? They'd laugh me out of the station. Still, I couldn't let it go. I replayed the recording carefully, over and over. The whisper was there, no doubt. The words were unclear, distorted by layers of sound. But it wasn't imagination. Someone had spoken, someone besides him. The following night, my obsession pushed me further. I waited until 3:15. The moment the noises began, I slipped into the stairwell, phone in hand, recording again. The sounds grew louder as I climbed, dragging, scraping, the steady rhythm of footsteps. I reached his door, my knees shaking. The noises were unmistakable now, and then I heard it. A single, muffled cry, short, sharp, cut off, almost instantly. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my phone. Panic surged through me, telling me to run, to get as far from that door as possible. But something stronger kept me rooted. The need to know. I leaned closer to the wood. The air seeping through the crack smelled stronger this time, metallic and sour. My stomach churned as I realized what it reminded me of. Blood. I staggered downstairs, heart racing, locked myself inside my apartment, and collapsed against the door. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but I froze, paralyzed by the thought, what if he heard me? What if he knew I'd been listening? The rest of the night, I sat with every light on, staring at the ceiling, waiting. The noises went on until dawn. When they finally stopped, I knew one thing for certain. Something, someone, was suffering in that apartment. The next morning, I stared at my phone for nearly an hour, finger hovering over the dial. The police, I should call them. I knew something was wrong. Those weren't just noises. There was someone, something up there that didn't belong. But the rational part of me hesitated. What could I possibly say? Hello, officer. My upstairs neighbor makes sounds at night, and I think he's hiding someone. They would laugh. Or worse, they'd come, knock on his door, find nothing, and then I'd be the paranoid tenant who stirred trouble. And what if he found out I was the one who called? I deleted the idea from my mind and decided instead I needed proof, solid proof. That evening, I went to an electronics shop and bought a small voice recorder, one that could run for hours without stopping. My plan was simple: place it in the stairwell outside his door and leave it overnight. If I captured what I thought I'd capture, the grinding, the dragging, the muffled cries, then I'd have something concrete. At 2:45 a.m., heart pounding, I crept upstairs. The hallway was silent, the old light bulb above flickering weakly. I bent down, slid the recorder behind the doormat in front of his door, and hurried back downstairs. The longest night of my life followed. I couldn't sleep, not with the thought of that little device sitting inches from his threshold, recording everything. Every creak of the building made me think he'd found it, that he'd come pounding on my door. At dawn, I retrieved it. The doormat was undisturbed. My hands shook as I pocketed the recorder and rushed back to my apartment. I pressed play. At first, only silence and faint building groans. Then, exactly at 3:17, it began. The dragging, the grinding, louder and clearer than ever. My pulse quickened as the noises filled my headphones. But then, there it was. A voice, muffled, strained, a cry that twisted my stomach into knots. It wasn't imagination this time. It wasn't just a distorted sound through the ceiling. It was a human voice, desperate, pleading, and then something worse. Another voice, lower, calm. The neighbor. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was chilling, steady, controlled, almost soothing. A conversation, one-sided, punctuated by the other voice's muffled sobs. I ripped the headphones off, sweat dripping down my temples. My breathing was ragged, my body trembling. There was no denying it now. Someone was up there with him. I spent the entire day in a fog, debating what to do. Every option seemed impossible. Call the police, risk exposure, move out, and leave whoever was trapped up there. The thought gnawed at me. I couldn't walk away. That night, I made another, reckless decision. I waited until the noises began, then crept back into the stairwell, recorder in hand. This time, I pressed my ear to the door while it ran. The sounds were horrific up close, chains rattling, wet thuds, and, God help me, the faintest sound of breathing, ragged and desperate, just inches beyond that door. My hand hovered over the doorknob. I knew it was locked, but in that moment, every instinct screamed at me to try, to push, to do something. Then, suddenly, silence. The grinding stopped. The dragging stopped. And in that silence, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer to the door. I bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping in my panic, and locked myself in my apartment. My chest burned as I tried to catch my breath. I sat in the dark, heart hammering, terrified that at any second he'd come knocking. But the knock never came. The next morning, when I cautiously stepped into the stairwell, the doormat outside his door had been moved. Not much, just slightly off center. But I knew he'd noticed. My blood ran cold. I barely slept after noticing that the doormat had been moved. It wasn't just paranoia. He had been to the door, maybe even stepped into the hallway, while I slept just a floor below. He had seen my recorder, maybe even touched it. Did he know it was mine? All day at work, I felt eyes on me, though I knew it was impossible. My co-workers' voices blurred, conversations drowned under the pounding in my head. He knows. He knows I was listening. That night, I triple locked my door, shoved a chair under the knob, and sat awake with every light on. For the first time, I considered leaving the apartment altogether, just walking away. But the thought of packing, of stepping into the hallway, of passing his door, it paralyzed me. At 3:17, the noises started again, but this time they sounded different, louder, angrier. The scraping and dragging were violent, echoing through the floor like he wanted me to hear. And then came the knock, a single, heavy knock on my ceiling. No, not on the ceiling, on the floor above, directly above my bed. My heart seized. I scrambled out of bed, staring up as another knock thundered down. Deliberate, precise. He knew. He knew. I pressed myself into the corner of the room, clutching my phone like a lifeline. My trembling fingers hovered over the emergency dial, but I couldn't do it. What would I even say? That my neighbor knocked on the floor? The knocking stopped as suddenly as it began. Then silence. The rest of the night stretched endlessly, filled only with my racing heartbeat. The next morning, I forced myself out into the stairwell. The hallway felt colder than usual, the air stale. As I passed his door, I noticed something that made my stomach lurch. A small smear of something dark near the bottom of the frame, faint, almost invisible. But I knew that color. Blood. I hurried downstairs, almost running into the shopkeeper. On the way out, he frowned at me. "You don't look well," he said. I opened my mouth to reply, but stopped. What could I say? That his upstairs tenant was dragging God knows what around at night and leaving blood on the doorframe? I just shook my head and left. That evening, I decided I needed more proof. I set my phone to record again, this time right by the ceiling, propped against the wall. If he wanted me to hear, then I would hear. What I captured was worse than anything before. The grinding was savage, metal against metal, over and over. Then came the dragging, wet and labored, but in the middle of it all, a scream. Muffled, yes, but unmistakable. Human, desperate. And then, chillingly, the low, steady voice again. Calm, almost soothing, like someone whispering a lullaby to a crying child. I stopped the recording, my hands slick with sweat. My heart felt like it would burst from my chest. It wasn't just noises. It wasn't my imagination. Someone was up there, someone who didn't want to be. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Every creak of the building sounded like a footstep outside my door. Every gust of wind rattling the window felt like a breath on my neck. And worst of all, I could no longer convince myself I was safe, because I wasn't just listening to him anymore. Now, he was listening back. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. My body went through the motions. commuting, working, eating, but my mind was trapped upstairs in that dimly lit apartment I'd never seen inside. Every second felt like a countdown to 3:17 a.m. When the hour came, I was ready, phone recording, lights off, sitting in the dark with my breath shallow. The noises began on schedule, the dragging, the metallic screech, the muffled cries, but then something new, footsteps. Not the heavy pacing I had heard before. These were sharper, closer, echoing right above my living room. I froze, clutching the phone tighter. The steps paused, and then, with deliberate slowness, they tracked across the ceiling, moving from one end of my apartment to the other, as if he knew exactly where I was sitting. I held my breath, terrified even the sound of my lungs would give me away. Then it happened. A voice, not muffled this time, not distorted by walls and ceilings, clear, low, and chilling. Listening? The words slithered down through the ceiling, cold as ice. I dropped the phone, scrambling backward until I hit the wall. My chest heaved, my skin prickled with sweat. For a long moment, silence stretched across the room, and then the grinding resumed, louder than ever. I didn't sleep at all. At dawn, I stumbled out into the hallway, desperate for air. That's when I noticed it. A piece of paper, folded neatly, wedged under my door. Hands trembling, I picked it up. There was no writing on the outside. I unfolded it. One sentence, written in jagged, uneven letters. Walls are thin. My stomach dropped, my vision blurred. He knew, he knew. I tore the note into pieces, my hands shaking so violently I could barely control them. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to leave everything behind, but my body wouldn't move. Fear rooted me to the spot. The rest of the day, I avoided the building, wandering the city like a ghost. But night always comes, no matter how far you walk. And when I finally returned, the hallway felt heavier, darker. As I passed his door, I froze. The smell, stronger now, metallic, sour, unmistakable. I gagged, covering my mouth, and hurried into my apartment. I locked the door, shoved furniture against it, and sat in the corner, gripping a kitchen knife I'd pulled from the drawer. My heart pounded so hard, it hurt. 17 came. The noises began again, louder, closer, angrier. The dragging, the thuds, the screams muffled, but sharp. And then silence, a long, heavy silence that pressed against my ears until I thought I'd go mad. Then came a knock, not upstairs this time, on my door, slow, heavy, 3 times. Thud, thud, thud. I nearly dropped the knife. My entire body shook as I pressed myself deeper into the corner. The knocking stopped, but I could see the shadow under the door. Feet, motionless, waiting. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the shadow shifted, faded. Steps moved away, up the stairs. I didn't move until the sun rose, and by then, I knew something with absolute certainty. This wasn't just about me listening anymore. Now, he was coming closer. The morning after the knocking, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the knife still clutched in my hand. My knuckles were white, my eyes red, and burning from lack of sleep. I hadn't moved all night. Every sound outside my door had become a threat. Every creak of the building, a possible step. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone, scrolled to the recordings I'd made, and pressed play. My hands trembled as the noises filled my apartment again. The dragging, the muffled cries, the heavy pacing. But when I reached last night's recording, the one where the voice had whispered, "Listening?" My stomach dropped. There was nothing there. The dragging, the cries, they were faint, but present. But the voice? The footsteps that had stalked across the ceiling, silent. It was as if my phone had heard nothing, as if I had imagined it all. No, I muttered to myself, pressing the phone tighter to my ear, replaying it again and again. But the result was the same. The one piece of undeniable proof I thought I had was gone. My only option left was the police. I forced myself out of the apartment. Every step in the hallway, like wading through wet cement. I kept my eyes down as I passed his door. Even so, I could feel it, the weight of someone standing just beyond it, listening. At the police station, I spilled everything. The noises, the notes, the knocking at my door. The officer behind the desk gave me the same polite, practiced smile I'd seen before when I'd come in with the initial complaint. "You say you haven't actually seen anything?" he asked, fingers tapping at the keyboard. "No, but I hear it every night." And he left me a note. "Do you have the note?" I hesitated. My stomach twisted. I'd destroyed it, torn it into shreds in a blind panic. I don't, I admitted. The officer's smile flickered. He leaned back in his chair. "Look, I'm not saying you're making this up, but without proof, written threats, photos, recordings, it's very difficult for us to act. Maybe talk to your landlord, see if there's a way to mediate with your neighbor." My blood boiled. Did you not hear me? He's threatening me. He's up there every night, dragging something. The officer raised a hand. "Sir, please calm down. We'll send a patrol by tonight, just to check in. But if nothing suspicious is observed, that's all we can do." A patrol. That was it. That was all the help I was going to get. By the time I left the station, the sun was already dipping low, staining the sky with bruised shades of orange and purple. My chest felt hollow, my legs heavy. The city bustled around me, alive and indifferent, while my world was shrinking into a nightmare no one else could see. That night, I sat in the dark again, waiting. 17. The sounds began, but this time, I forced myself to move. Knife in hand, phone in the other, I climbed the stairs. Every creak of the wood echoed through my skull. My throat was dry, my breath ragged. I stopped at his door. The smell hit me instantly. Rancid, metallic, stronger than ever. My stomach lurched. For a long moment, I just stood there, trembling, staring at the chipped paint of his door. And then, with all the courage I could muster, I lifted my fist and knocked. Silence. I waited, my ears strained. Nothing. Then, ever so faintly, a scrape, not behind the door, but above it, in the ceiling. I stumbled back, heart racing. My grip on the knife tightened until the handle dug into my palm. And then, the sound of movement, slow, deliberate, sliding just beyond the thin plaster overhead. I couldn't do it. I turned and bolted back down the stairs, slamming my door shut and locking it, chest heaving. The noises upstairs grew louder, faster, angrier, and then silence. I collapsed against the door, tears blurring my vision. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run, but something inside me whispered that it wouldn't matter, that no matter where I went, he would follow. When I finally drifted into a restless sleep at dawn, I dreamed of walls closing in, of shadows pressing against thin plaster, whispering my name through the cracks. And when I woke, I wasn't sure anymore where the dream ended and reality began. The following night, I sat in my living room with every light turned on. The knife lay across my lap, the phone gripped tightly in my hand. My body was coiled like a spring, waiting for the inevitable. But tonight wasn't just any night. Tonight, the police patrol was supposed to come by. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of relief. Someone else would finally hear it. Someone else would see. At 3 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not the heavy tread of my upstairs neighbor, but steadier, firmer. I peeked through the peephole and saw two uniformed officers standing outside, speaking quietly. I opened the door before they could knock. "Thank God you're here," I whispered, my voice hoarse. The taller officer adjusted his belt. "We're just making a routine check. You reported disturbances from the apartment above?" "Yes, every night at 3:17. The noises, the dragging, the screams. You'll hear it too, I swear." The shorter officer gave me a skeptical glance, but nodded. "All right, let's wait." We stood in my apartment, the three of us surrounded by a silence so heavy I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My clock ticked toward the hour. 15:03, 16:03, 17. The ceiling groaned, a long, low sound, like wood straining under impossible weight. The dragging started, slow, deliberate, exactly as it always did. "There," I hissed, pointing upward. The officers froze. The taller one tilted his head, his expression tightening. The shorter one muttered, "What the hell is that?" The sound grew louder, metallic scraping, a thud, a muffled cry that cut off too quickly. The taller officer's hand went to his radio. Unit 24 requesting backup, possible disturbance. And then it stopped. Silence. The apartment above us was still. Dead still. The shorter officer swore under his breath. We should check it out. Keys rattled as they stepped into the hallway. I followed, my stomach in knots. They climbed the stairs, their flashlights cutting through the shadows. When we reached the upstairs apartment, the smell hit us, sour, metallic, suffocating. The taller officer knocked. "Police, open the door." Nothing. He knocked again, harder. "Sir, open up." Silence. Finally, he turned to his partner. "Step back." With a sharp kick, the door splintered inward. The stench exploded into the hallway, thick and nauseating. My stomach lurched, and I covered my mouth as bile rose in my throat. The officers entered, flashlights sweeping the darkness. I hovered at the threshold, my body screaming not to go inside. The beam of a flashlight illuminated the living room. Bare walls, no furniture, no curtains, just an empty shell of an apartment. But the smell was overwhelming. The officers moved deeper in. One of them muttered, "Jesus Christ." On the far wall, scratched into the plaster with something sharp, were words, jagged, uneven, fresh. "He knows you watch." My knees buckled. I gripped the door frame, the knife still in my hand, trembling violently. The taller officer swept his light around the ceiling. "There's no one here." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "He's here. He's always here." The shorter officer glanced at me with something between pity and suspicion. "Sir, this apartment has been vacant for months. The landlord said no one's rented it since last year." My mouth went dry. I stared into the empty darkness, the stench still clawing at my lungs. Vacant, empty. But I had heard him. I had smelled him. I had seen the note. The taller officer stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "If someone's been squatting here, they're gone now. We'll file a report, but—" He hesitated. "It might be a good idea for you to get some rest. Maybe stay somewhere else for a while." I wanted to scream at them, to shake them until they understood. But my voice was gone, strangled by terror. They left soon after, leaving the door broken, the words carved into the wall glowing faintly under the flashlight beam that lingered in my memory. When I returned to my apartment, I locked the door, shoved the furniture back against it, and collapsed to the floor. Through the silence, I heard it, from the ceiling, 3 knocks, slow, deliberate, thud, 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 the sound of someone who was never gone. After the police left, I barely slept for 3 nights. The knocks continued, slow, heavy, deliberate, always at the same hour. I would lie in bed, knife clutched to my chest, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. But the most terrifying part was that now the noises weren't just coming from above. I began noticing subtle shifts in my apartment, small things at first. My keys on the counter moved slightly from where I left them, a chair not quite aligned with the table, the faintest scuff marks on the wooden floor. I told myself it was exhaustion, paranoia. I was imagining things, but my instincts screamed otherwise. One night at 3:17 a.m., I awoke to the familiar metallic scraping, but this time it was inside the apartment, not the ceiling, not the hallway. Inside, I froze, every nerve screaming. Slowly, I got out of bed, heart hammering. The sound came again, coming from the kitchen. I reached for the knife, stepping lightly toward the source. The room was empty. I gasped, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I checked the window, the balcony, every corner. Nothing. Then I noticed it, a faint smear along the edge of the counter, something dark, sticky. I froze, stomach churning. Blood. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, heart hammering. I snapped on the flashlight, the counter, the floor near the sink, even the inside of the cabinet under the sink. Traces of dark red, like someone had dragged something across it. Panic washed over me. I tried to tell myself I must be imagining it, but the smell confirmed my worst fears. Iron, metallic, rancid. I backed away slowly and turned toward my bedroom, and there, on the floor near the bed, was another note, smaller than before, folded neatly. I unfolded it with trembling fingers, written in the same jagged handwriting. Look closer. I spun around the room, scanning every surface, every shadow. That's when I noticed it. The ceiling, where a faint crack had run since I moved in, seemed slightly wider. A shadow shifted behind it. I pressed my ear to the ceiling and froze. The scraping, dragging, low, muffled voice. It was coming from everywhere, above me, around me, inside me. The sense of being watched was overwhelming. I staggered back, tripping over a chair. My phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor, flashlight rolling across the tiles. The blood, the notes, the sounds. They weren't just warnings. They were a message. I wasn't safe in my own apartment. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run as far as possible. But something deep inside, a mix of fear, curiosity, and obsession, kept me rooted. I had come too far. I had heard too much. I had documented too many nights. And yet, I was beginning to question myself. Had I imagined him? Had my exhaustion twisted reality? The police saw nothing. My recordings were ambiguous. My neighbors whispered rumors, but no one else had ever seen anything. And yet, the blood, the notes, the shifting shadows, they were real. By the 4th night, I had made a decision. I had to know. No matter the risk, no matter the consequences, I was going to confront the truth. And if I didn't, I feared I would lose my mind completely. I spent the final night pacing my apartment, heart hammering, knife in hand, flashlight ready. Every creak, every faint groan, every whisper of wind through the window made me jump. I was exhausted, trembling, but I knew I couldn't leave this unresolved. 17 a.m. arrived with its usual precision. The scraping began, louder, more deliberate, closer than ever before. I froze, listening. Then came the dragging, wet, heavy, labored. I gripped the knife tightly and forced myself toward the bedroom ceiling, toward the faint crack that had always seemed wider, darker, more alive than it should be. My flashlight beam danced across the plaster, revealing nothing, nothing visible. Yet I felt it. Every instinct screamed it. Something was there, just out of sight, watching, waiting. I grabbed my phone, hitting record again, not for proof, but for myself. If this was the end, someone, somewhere would know what had happened. The noises stopped. Silence. Then, a whisper. Finally, the word wasn't from above. It was all around me. My skin crawled, every hair standing on end. I spun in a circle, flashlight darting across every corner. The shadows seemed to move in response, twisting unnaturally. I backed up until my back hit the wall. There, on the floor, another note. I didn't touch it at first. My fingers shook too violently. Finally, I unfolded it. You can't leave. A cold dread washed over me. My chest tightened, breathing shallow. I tried to move toward the door, toward freedom, but my feet felt glued to the floor. Then the ceiling cracked, not a small hairline fissure, but a long, jagged tear, widening as if forced apart by some unseen force. Dust fell, plaster crumbling onto the floor. From the ceiling, a shape emerged, indistinct at first, shifting, shadowy. The metallic scent hit me instantly, overpowering, suffocating. My knife felt useless, my flashlight trembling in my hand. I tried to scream. No sound came out. The shape descended slowly, human, not human. It was tall, impossibly thin, limbs unnaturally long, the faintest hint of a face twisted and featureless. And then I heard it, a wet, dragging sound again, right at my feet. The last thing I saw before blacking out was the shadow leaning closer, whispering just inches from my ear. Welcome to the silence. I woke hours later. Sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds. The apartment was normal. The notes gone, the blood gone, the ceiling intact, the building quiet, as if nothing had ever happened. I never saw him again. The landlord insisted no one had been in the upstairs apartment for months. My neighbors claimed the building had been quiet all week. And yet, I knew. I knew that somewhere, just out of sight, the thing, or the man, was waiting, listening. Every creak, every scraping sound, every whisper of the wind reminded me, you never truly leave the silence upstairs. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear the dragging,